When I was a kid, I used to play down by the creek that was behind my house. I'd throw rocks, play with plastic army men, make little houses out of mud and sticks, having them sink into the creek. On a particular hot day in July when I was about 9, I was sitting by the edge of the creek. I had my feet in the water trying to cool down as the day was unbearably humid. I had my eyes closed and didn't hear her walk up. "Hello," I heard an older voice say. I opened my eyes and saw a thin middle-aged woman wearing a thin white dress walking barefoot, carrying a box under an arm. I recognized the box as a fishing tackle box that looked similar to my dad's, only a different color. I thought it was strange that she had a tackle box but no fishing poles. "Hey lady," I asked, "how are you going to fish if you don't have any poles?" She smiled at me and made eye contact. I wish she hadn't. Being as young as I was, I didn't quite understand it. But I felt slightly scared when I looked into those eyes. There was just something so fake about the happiness in them. It was like staring into the plastic eyes of a stuffed animal. They were made to look happy, but wasn't the real thing. Her mouth was stretched into a grin that slightly quivered. She spoke in a hushed, smoky voice of fragile composure. "Oh no, little boy, I'm not fishing. I'm using this for something very special." The way she said that last part really sent alarms off even for a child as young as I was. She said it with a girlish giggle that sounded more like a recording, an imitation. I didn't want to ask what it was and began to walk away. Then, she spoke again. I was going to do it by myself, but I think I need a little helper. Her eyes got wider and she started to walk towards me. "No, that's okay," I shouted and ran away from the woman into my house and locked the door. I told my mom about it and she went outside, but the woman was already gone. A few days later, my mom approached me with a worried look on her face and showed me a picture she cut out of the newspaper. "Honey, that woman you saw on Tuesday, was this her?" She showed me a photo of a woman standing with a man by a house, both of them with ear-to-ear smiles. It was her without a doubt. Those blank eyes were not something you can forget. I said yes, she was. I made a frightened face, and my mom looked down, dropping the photo and hugged me. "Oh honey, I would never let anyone hurt you," she cried. I was confused but was glad she was comforting me. My mom had a police officer come talk to me. The officer and I played with my action figures for a while we talked. He asked me about the lady. I told him the same story I told my mom, and I saw the same worried expression my mom had. "Wow, she sounds really scary," he said the way adults do when they talk to children. He showed me a photo lineup of various women's ID photos and asked me if I could pick her out. I immediately did, as she is the only one with a smile. She kept smiling at me. That smile looked wrong. When I told the officer this, he froze and went a little pale for a second. "Yes, it must have been very scary, but you sound very smart for being able to get away from her," he said in that same adult tone to please children. "Who is she?" I asked seriously. The cop paused and looked at me in sorrow. "She was hurt very badly, and we needed to talk to you to know when you saw her so we can guess when she got hurt." That answer satisfied me, and I didn't ask about it anymore. A few weeks later, the local police department sent me a certificate for a junior PI for my help with the case. My parents said they were very proud of me, but they'd often still glance at each other with that same worried look whenever I brought it up. Soon after, they forbade me to go to the creek alone. Years later, I'm in college getting my master's in criminal justice and working as a file clerk at the local police department part-time. One day, I run into the same officer that talked to me that one day at a mutual friend's birthday party. He was already long retired, but still remembered me. We began to talk when I brought up my certificate jokingly and asked if he remembered that case. He went silent and looked down at his drink. "Yeah, I remember that one all right." He got up and motioned me to follow him somewhere more private. Outside, he lit up a cigarette and told me the story. That woman was a recent divorcee whose husband she discovered was cheating on her for a much younger woman. He said that when they interviewed her friends, she still continued to be chipper, and everyone thought she was just being optimistic. She lived about a mile from my house, but by the same creek. Her husband loved to fish as a hobby. That day, just an hour before I saw her, she broke into her ex-husband's home, found his new wife on the bed sleeping, and strangled her with a cord before stealing her husband's tackle box. The officer began to shake when he explained what she did next. She climbed up into a tree. Sitting on a branch, she opened the tackle box. Taking out all the hooks, she threaded fishing lines through them and tied them to the same end of the branch. After she tied about 10 hooks on fishing lines, she took them all in her hand. She swallowed all of the hooks and jumped off the branch. The coroner estimated that she was hanging there for half an hour before she bled to death. But the worst part, the officer, now almost in tears, stammered to say, was that smile. Even dead, she still had on a fucking smile. Blood everywhere. Her eyes were rolled back, till you only saw the whites. but she still had a big ear-to-ear smile. After hearing this, I immediately thought what she would have done to me and what I would have seen if I agreed to be her helper. It was a quiet, cold, windy night in the cornfield I was in with my dog. My father told me to search through the somewhat small yet vast cornfield. My father was always scared of people that weren't us in his field. We both grew up hearing stories of our family members encountering unexplainable things in forests, old buildings, and that very cornfield my father sent me to search. I remember how my father used to tell me experiences he had in that field, like seeing the stalks move on their own when the night was still and hearing sounds of animals like coyotes far or even close to him. Yet, he's with me sharing the story. I always take my dog with me because he's able to sense something wrong from afar. There were some close calls several times in my life. All could have turned bad, but never had thanks to my dog. I quite literally owe my life to him. I then noticed the wind suddenly stopping. It was a still night once again. It was my time to search the field on a still night. I walked onto the dry dirt. My dog silently followed. I walked to the field. It looked so small, yet through the stalks so vast. I paused inches before entering the field, my dog too, and he looked up at me wondering why we were still. This gave me reassurance as he did not know what I needed to know. I then entered the field in the near darkness of sunset. As soon as I started roaming around in the field, the sun was gone, and moonlight began to shine throughout the place. My flashlight was very dim, as it was pretty old. Still, my dog walked with me with no issue. I was getting pretty close to the tree line when a memory came up to me. Long ago, my mother warned me not to check a certain section of the cornfield. This part of the cornfield was on the far left side. It was a spot that led to the forest that was next to the field. I remember seeing it only once, and that one time was enough for me. There was a clearing with a small, yet huge wooden house. It was abandoned for a very long time as my father remembered it always being abandoned. I remember seeing the building's roof through the corn and hearing its many creaking sounds. Something always felt wrong about that house. It just emitted a very bad feeling. Anyways, as I got closer to that side of the field, I noticed my dog looking around more and treading carefully. He does that whenever he knows the presence of small critters like rats who eat the corn. Really, nothing to care about. For a moment I felt sorta lost, despite me always walking in a straight line when searching through the corn, which is normal considering I've been walking through corn for maybe half an hour already. Then the roof of that house popped out of the corn in the near darkness. That feeling or presence returned. I all of a sudden heard some type of whimpering from some type of animal. It was my dog. I almost forgot that he was here with me after staring at the roof for a second. Just something about that building just takes away my breath and makes me stare at it. Maybe that's my fear of it speaking to me. I take a look at my dog. He's doing nearly the same thing as me, but instead of mindlessly staring at it like how I did, he was staring at it with only one thing in his mind: fear. I immediately knew something was wrong, and that feeling of safety vanished. Before I could think, my dog began moving away from me, slowly getting faster like something was getting close. This was unusual, as my dog always stayed by my side. I instantly knew this was my call to follow my dog. As soon as I began to follow him in a sort of speed walk, I heard wind between the corn, shaking the corn in the process. I had a feeling to check if it was really wind, so I put my arm up as high as I could towards the sky and above the corn while on the tips of my toes. The wind wasn't passing through my fingers, as the wind wasn't here today. I was not alone. I began running towards the direction of the end of the field. My dog started running when I wasn't looking, and yet he was too slow to keep up with me. The wind was blowing harder as the corn was shaking, tearing, and falling to the floor. I only imagined it was wind to keep myself calm so I wouldn't panic and ultimately not have enough air in me to keep running. It was blowing harder and harder until my dog wasn't fast enough and got engulfed by the wind. It went straight through him. The wind wasn't interested in him in the slightest. It was blowing towards me. I repeatedly amped my pace to outrun this thing. It did so too, like it knew exactly what move to mimic from me. I started to get tired and started to pant. It did so too with its somewhat deep yet high-pitched, animalistic yet humanoidish sounding voice, if I could call it that. I started to see moonlight reflecting off the ground through the corn stalks. I was almost out. I'm almost there. I felt the great feeling of the stalks brushing against me as I exited out of the cornfield. I was not looking at the front of my house anymore. I was looking at nothing but forest. I looked to my left. There was my house from afar. I began running towards it, almost there, as I heard the thing moving in stalks, going towards me, until I heard the sound of my shoes on the porch. I then realized that in my fear, I've already reached home. I opened the door, and as I was about to close it, my dog went inside the house as terrified as I was. Once I closed and locked the door, I fell down to the floor out of breath. I looked at my dog. He looked like he was tearing up and shaking violently out of fear. He had scratches on him from the stalks, but too from whatever that thing was in that field. The home was quiet and dark like the field. My parents were asleep since it was late. I stayed next to the door until I could catch my breath. My dog went to his bed now, sound asleep. I got up, and as I was heading back to my room, I felt the need to look at the window, so I did. I pulled the curtains back, put my head as close to the window as I could to see as much out there in the dark as I could, and I saw a dark figure standing in the cornfield. I stood there frozen. It stood there frozen as well. We both didn't move for minutes. I noticed that it had its head tilted in what I think was curiosity. As we both looked at each other, I noticed that it had animal-like legs, and yet it still looked humanoid. This was no human, nor any animal that I know of. That thing then turned its head facing to the field in an unnatural, robotic, yet animalistic motion, like it had noticed something in said field while tilting its head back to its normal position. It went back into the field unnaturally. I still stood there in complete shock at what I just witnessed. I then put the pieces together with what I encountered. I believe what I encountered that night was a skinwalker, no doubt about it. I never told my family members or anyone about this until now. 7 years have passed since that day. I was 14 when I saw that thing, and it has since been quiet around here. However, I have the feeling like it's been too quiet as of late. A thought that I've been dreading is now lingering in my head. I or someone else might be the unfortunate next one to encounter it. I have a feeling that the next time won't be so pleasant compared to what I experienced. The only thing I can really do at this point is to pray to God that the next time won't be the final time. I can only pray.